In this video, I'm going to hopefully briefly share with you some tips for reading the standards and some things I want you to think about as you're looking through them. When you want to visit them, you can go to this link that I have in our Moodle course, and it will take you to all of the standards for North Carolina K-12, all the content areas. They're all housed here on the Department of Public Instruction page for North Carolina. So when you come to it, you'll see that down the left-hand side are all of the different content areas, and then that's how they've organized the standards under these content areas. So for example, if I'm interested in science, since I'm hovering over it, I'll click on it, and then it will open this drop-down section. It'll talk about the goals of the science standards, but then over here in this drop-down section, you'll see resources specific to grade levels, and then most importantly, you'll see the actual standard course of study, which is what guides you when you're teaching. Now, it's different than a pacing guide. We mentioned a pacing guide for several of you in class last week or the week before. Someone mentioned having to follow a pacing guide. And a pacing guide is something that's done by the district, not the state. The school district, usually leaders within the school district, will come up with a guide for pacing, essentially, for how you should hit each topic and the standards that fall under those topics as the year progresses. And they'll determine it based on whatever formula they've decided is the best approach to the students learning those topics. And so they don't necessarily follow the same order as the standard course of study, but they should still follow the standard course of study in terms of the standards that they address in the pacing guide. Now, if you're not in a school yet as a teacher, you don't have a pacing guide, but when you are, you'll see that you have one. Usually, most districts have a pacing guide that tells the teacher when he or she should be hitting the topics. So, we're going to click on the standard course of study, and you'll see that there are several different links here in the middle that you can click on. I don't love this website because I think that you'll see if you click on the different content areas that this part in the middle is organized differently for each of them, and sometimes it's not very clear which link you should click. So you have to play with it, and if you have any questions, you can always ask me. But you'll see in the middle for science, there is a link for the standards for science, and then there are some others. So I'm going to click on this one first, and then we're going to talk about some of those. When I click on the standards for science, it will pop me down to here. And first you'll see the essential standards, and they're in elementary, they're broken into K2, 3, 5, and then middle has its own document, and then high school, it's broken into courses rather than grades. So your physical science, biology, so forth. So that's how you'll click on them. So don't think, oh, well, I'm 5th grade, but it's a biology standard, so I'm going to click on biology. That would be high school. So you want to stay within your grade ranges that are whatever is specific to what you're teaching. So unless you're high school, you're going to be up here. So then when I click on it, it's a PDF, and a PDF will open for me. And this one said K2, and it'll be in order of the grades, so starting with kindergarten. And it'll give you a little bit of background information at the beginning, and it'll tell you what these letters mean, the different domains within the content area. And I'm sitting out on my porch to stay away from my husband and my children, so now I have to deal with the traffic on the road. So I hope that's not bothering you. But you'll see that you have physical science, earth science, life science, and then you'll have more specific topics within those as well. So physical science is your P, and we talked about in class, the first thing that you see is the grade. So in class we had a 2, and that meant second grade. This is a K for kindergarten. Physical science, the first standard, which is right here. And we said in class, and we're going to talk a little bit more this week, that a standard is broader and not quite so specific. So this says understand the positions and motions of objects and organisms observed in the environment. So that's a little bit bigger. And then if you look over here under the objectives, you have objectives that are more specific and a little bit more measurable, because we said understand is difficult to measure. But if you look over at kindergarten physical science, first standard, first objective, it says compare the relative position of various objects observed in the classroom using position words in front of, behind, between, on top of. So it's specific. So I can measure that because I can have my students actually compare the position of different objects in the room or outside the room using words like in front of, behind, between. So, I can say the tree is in front of me, but the ball is behind me. And so I that's something I can talk about. I can say it orally, or maybe if it's near the end of the year, they can write it, or whatever they're doing, they can talk about it with a partner. But it's something that I can hear them doing, and I can measure it, so it's a little more specific than this. And you see that's true as you go through the objectives, give examples that's a little bit more specific as they go down this side. So the standard is larger, the objective is smaller. Then you get to life science, kindergarten life science, first standard, first objective, and so forth. So it reads the same as you scroll through. So we get into second, same thing. They're going to use the same lettering system to keep it consistent. So I know P still means physical science, and it's going to be true of that as we go through. So I'm going to click back over. If we click on biology, see it's very similar to the kindergarten through second grade document. Gives you some background information, and it's set up very similarly, if not exactly the same. And it shows you, the larger topic. This says bio as my first thing to tell me that's the course, the first standard. And so forth. So you see you have your standards and your objectives. Okay. So one other thing I wanted to point out in the science section is when you click on the standard course of study, it gives you the standards, but it also gives you the unpacking standards. And if you were back at this page, when I first clicked on standard course of study, I can also access them here. So I can click on it here, or I can click here, and it takes me to them too. And the unpacking standards are in separate documents because they're a little bit bigger. And what that means is the standards have been expanded in a way that's supposed to give you more information. So if I click on the kindergarten science unpacked content, what I should see is the standard. Now instead of being written down this left-hand side, it's expanded so it has the whole page. And then the objectives are underneath it instead of beside it, but same objectives. Everything's still the same, it's just set up a little bit differently. But the difference in this document than the previous one is that now we have these sections underneath that are supposed to elaborate on what the students will know, understand, and be able to do in the standard. And I find that very helpful because sometimes I read objectives and I think, okay, what really are they asking? What is the student supposed to do? Sometimes an objective might be a little bit tricky in the way that we think about it. And the unpacking standards, someone either working for the State Department of Education or at the district level, somebody has taken the time to tease out the objectives so that I can have a little more clarification. And I think that's very helpful. I think that is really helpful with math. I know I use the unpacking standards often in math. If we look back at math, we'll see if it's still linked the same way. You see there are links here, but remember I can go to Standard Course of Study and see this one's linked a little bit differently. Instead of it being, I can click on this, there's the link. I don't know why they do it differently for each content area. You see this one looks a little bit different and is not what I wanted. That's the overview. There's the Standard Course of Study right here. So where you click on PDF. But right now, instead of clicking on that, I'm going to click on the unpacking standards so you can see them again. So this looks like science. You have the different grades pulled out. So if we click on 7th grade as an example, you'll see that it has the standards and objectives just like the other one did, and then it has some clarification, which is what I really like about it. So this is math. So it will give you the standard, the objective, and then it has clarification, and then it has examples and things you can use with the students, like problems that directly match the standard, which I think is very, very helpful. And I probably shouldn't have clicked on middle school math since none of you are middle school math, but we know Maggie's high school math, which would be here, and then we have several elementary people. So say we click on 4th grade math, it's the same thing. It has those examples that I think are very helpful in understanding what it's asking. So like here's an example, and it shows you how the students could represent it in different ways. Gives you a lot of information. Gives you problem examples, all directly related to whatever the objective is. So I really like that. Okay, and then remember you have all of the resources. So there are high school resources for math, for Maggie, and these different things you can click on. I have not totally explored all of those, but they're available to you. And I want you to spend a little bit of time exploring some of this as you're getting familiar with the standards. So you should click on whatever is applicable to you, which means that if you're elementary, you're probably going to be clicking on a few of them, you know, language arts, math, science, social studies. But then if you are not elementary, then you can focus on your particular content area. You know, like Molly, you'll be English. But you need to then, I think, which is very helpful, kind of explore what's around what you're planning to teach, because it's going to help you understand what your students should know coming to you, what should have been taught, and I'm not saying it wasn't taught if they don't know it, because we never know with students and retention, but what they may have been exposed to is the idea. And then it's also helpful to know what they should know moving forward. So what are they going to be exposed to in the grades after you that you can be helping prepare them for, even if it's not the same content, it could be the thinking skills. So if they're doing something in 9th grade English that, even though it won't be the same readings and the same activities, but it's a way of thinking that could prepare them for 10th, 11th, and 12th grade English. So that's always a good thing, is to be aware of what's being taught in the grades surrounding your grade. Another reason why it's important to know that is because you'll need that for differentiation. So you'll always, always, always have students who come to you who need some backtracking. You need to go back in the standards and give them some support in some way because they're missing something or they're struggling with something, and you can go back and look at some more foundational skills to support them. No matter what grade, you're going to encounter that. And then also, you need to think about students who perhaps need to be challenged in a way. Not necessarily that you'll accelerate them through the content, but if your content area kind of spirals, meaning that you teach something and then the next year they teach the same topic but in a more complex way, and then the next year they teach that topic again but in an even more complex way. That's true, I know, for a lot of the ideas in language arts, and even like in science, force and motion is taught in all the grades in elementary school, but the level of complexity changes as the grades move up, and the type of vocabulary that's used and the ideas. So that's how you can think too, is how can I challenge my student by maybe adding in a more complex idea that's pulled from a later grade. Okay, so spend some time looking through these and thinking about what you teach and getting a handle on what is taught in the grade that you plan to teach or are already teaching, and see how they progress, see how they build on each other. One thing, for example, in the English one to pay attention to is set up a little bit differently. I didn't mean English as a second language, I meant English language arts. This one. So if I click on Standard Course of Study, there it is. It's not set up in grades, it's one document. And it does show how the concepts progress because it'll have an anchor standard that's supposed to be applicable to all grades K-12. And then the objective is more specific to the grade. So then you can see how the students are building on those skills and concepts as they move from kindergarten to 12th grade. So you see that in all of these. Like here's an anchor standard, and it's very general. And then the kindergarten through 12th, well, this one only goes through 8th grade, but it builds. Oh no, it does go through 12th. I missed that. So you see the anchor standard again, it's in blue, and it builds. So spend some time looking through these and let me know what questions you have or clarifications, knowing that you absolutely do not need to memorize these. Over time, and I'm talking about years and years that you're teaching, you'll probably be able to refer to specific ones, and you might even know the exact number of them. But there's really no point in memorizing them as long as you're able to know where to look to find them, and you have a general idea, and you know what is taught overall in your grade.